Hello and welcome to episode number 45 of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast. Today is Sunday, April 12th, 2015. I'm Melissa Agnes, and this podcast is brought to you by Agnes Day. Let's talk crisis intelligence. Curtis, welcome to the show. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about what you do?
Yes, Melissa, thank you for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to your listeners as well as to communicate with you because you're definitely a great voice in this area, the great work you do with a number of different entities. So I'm humbled and honored that you would consider me to be on today. I'm the Director of Social Engagement at the American Red Cross. It's a position I've been in about a year and a half. My predecessor, Wendy Harmon, is widely known as one of the great voices in the crisis disaster response and social space. And so I inherited a great program from her. What the work that we do is really it's the social engagement strategy for the entire American Red Cross. And we group that into kind of two areas. Blue Sky, which is the day-to-day aspects of our mission and our business and what we do in terms of blood donation, people taking courses, preparedness, service to armed forces, international services, and the like. And then our gray sky, which is our disasters. And that could be everything from, what we call everyday disasters, the ones we deal with every day, like home fires, which is the one that we deal with most prominently, all the way to large-scale natural disasters, whether they be tornadoes, earthquakes, hurricanes, et cetera. And so I have a team of 4 great people that collectively what our role is during disasters is to make sure that from a communication standpoint, we are assessing the situation on social and that we are providing information to people as they need it. That's our main push, and also providing intelligence to the organization internally based on what we see from our social tracking as to parts of the conversation that different parts of our organization need to be aware of so they can be more impactful.
Wow. And it's been a while since I've wanted to chat with you about, just your social media command center, and I can't believe that it's 4 people.
Yes, we are lucky in the sense of we have kind of extended reach. For example, now, Melissa, you'd be interested to know we have 2 command centers. One is our one at headquarters, and one is a more regional based one in Dallas, which is staffed by 2 people. And then we're also, I'm not sure when this podcast is airing, but maybe soon thereafter it airs next month. We will be opening a 3rd DigiDoc, as we call it, in the Bay Area. So we're going to have DigiDocs in 3 points of the country. So there will be staffed by 2 people as well. But we also have digital volunteers that we can mobilize as needed, who work from home and who can kind of jump in to help us for different shifts of 3 to 4 hours during a disaster too.
Okay. So I knew about your volunteer program, and I've got so many questions just surrounding all of this. So I guess first, I'd love to paint a picture. So whether people listening are listening because they're interested, they work with government and they're emergency managers, and they kind of want to grasp what this is and how it works and what it looks like and what to anticipate, or even if it's corporate entities that are listening, people in the corporate. Oh, for listeners' benefit, Curtis is on his phone on his Skype. So if we hear some awkward buzzes like that one, it just startled me. That's what we're hearing. So, and that's not a problem. The importance is having you on the call with me. So no matter who's listening, maybe we could paint a picture of, the DigiDoc, what it is, what it looks like. It has to be scalable.
Right. I mean, well, here is one philosophical thing, and then I'll take you on a little virtual tour from there. So philosophically, the command center approach is just really an approach that you take where you say, in a disaster, we're going to be always on. We're going to have an always on mentality because we understand that during a disaster, social becomes a channel of communication that people turn to a great deal. And we saw that escalation really start in 2010 with Haiti and just just continue to grow. Really in 2012 with Sandy, and then the Colorado floods, and the tornadoes in Moore, Oklahoma, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a channel that people are going to. So whether you're a government entity, whether you're a nonprofit, whether you're anybody in this relief space or response space, you have to be clear that social is going to be a channel people use, and you got to have a way to listen. Now, for some agencies, it's having 5 people in a room using their laptops that are tied into some sort of listening software, and that's your command center. In our particular case, we were fortunate enough that Dell Computers came in and gave us a grant that allowed us to build out a physical space. So what the physical space is, it's located in our bigger digital operations center, which is kind of the nerve center of the Red Cross during a disaster. This is where you have everybody from our mapping folks to our disaster relief folks to our mass care folks to our disaster leaders really doing what they can from headquarters to support the strategy on the ground. So we have our little space there, which if you can visualize it as kind of if you think through kind of a weather center, control center, if you will. So, and kind of / mission control. If you do a mashup of those, you get a visual of this. So it consists of 6 television screens, 6 kind of big screens. We use Radian 6 as our social monitoring tool. And so in the back end of Radian 6, we kind of set up what we'd like to listen for. And that's a bunch of keywords that we've tried and tested over the years that really talk about disasters. The command center screens allow us to use some of the visualizations that are built into Radian 6 to visualize the social posts that we're seeing on the back end. So we may have a map up of the United States. And what we can do is, based on the volume of tweets coming from a particular state, that state will change color. So if, for example, when we have an earthquake in California, California will be red because there's so many tweets emanating about disasters in California. So that gives us kind of a heads up that we need to kind of look into that a little bit deeper. We also may have visualizations that show us not only where the conversations are taking place, but who's driving the conversations. So is it media outlets? Is it celebrities? Is it reporters? Is it government agencies? Is it our partners? We also have the ability to look at things like what's the share of voice and kind of how these are mapping to our keywords. We also have a word cloud scenario that's able to take these posts in and kind of tell us what's the term that most people are using. So sometimes that might be explosion, that might be fire, that might be casualties, it might be shot. So you can have that in there, and that's kind of our first line of defense to really see when you can imagine, like in Sandy, between October, and I wasn't even here at that point, but I've talked to the team about that as a kind of pivotal time in our space, and that was the first major disaster that happened after our digital disaster operations center opened. They processed about 2 million tweets that came in the span of like late October to December, I think. And so we were visualizing those, and then you're able to kind of put a process in place by. There's no way we can physically look at all of them, but we can look at kind of the trends, and then we can pick a representative sample to help us out a bit. But the other aspects of the DigiDoc that I think are really important too is it not only serves a role as kind of our social command center during disasters, and also a place we can kind of monitor the conversation during day-to-day basis, but we also have you can do interviews from there via Skype. We have that. Sorry for the buzz, folks. We could do interviews from there. We can also, it has television lighting, so if people want to do connections from there to show the screens. So it's a multifunction area that's our digital nerve center during a disaster. And the ones in Dallas and the one upcoming in the Bay Area kind of have that same model. They're a little bit smaller in terms of screens and footprint.
Wow. And so considering, so your volunteers, can the DigiDoc and just the whole command center, can it also be accessed to this or accessible to this degree remotely? Or do you actually need to be on location?
No, you do not need to be on location, which is a great thing. You don't need to be on location. You can, our digital volunteers are trained in different things. So some of them are actually trained on the Radian 6 tool, and there's 2 parts of the tool. There's the listening tool, which is more of the analytics, and the engagement tool. we have a group of our digital volunteers that are trained on the engagement tool, so they can log in from anywhere and from any device. They can log in from a tablet, a phone, a laptop, what have you, and go into the engagement console. And what the engagement console will be is we'll set up the listening kind of terms. They can actually get a stream, kind of an inbox of tweets around that, or social posts. So we can tell a digital volunteer, let's say a tornado is imminent. We can set it up where a digital volunteer will just see social posts that mention tornado in terms like scared, nervous, fearful, what do I do? And they can respond to these people and give them information from the Red Cross, whether it's preparedness information, whether it's reminding them to download the tornado app so they can get warnings, whether it's reminding them of where the safe areas in their residence are. So a digital volunteer can do that from anywhere. And it's really a good program. It's still in extended beta because we're working out kind of how to scale it and how to monitor it better. But in some cases, we've had situations where they've been domestic disasters, but our digital volunteers, we have some that are stationed in some of our Red Cross service to armed forces kind of installations around the globe. So that's really helpful in a disaster because with the time differences, when we have to kind of recharge and rest and give people a break, you have people carrying on through the night who can respond because it's 7:00 a.m. in Germany, and they can respond with the information that we sent. So that's how people are able to tap in. So they can actually see the same things that we're seeing. Not necessarily the visualizations because that's not as useful to them, but the actual content
data.
The data, they can see it.
So good. That it's so important, and it's so important to the digital volunteers. I mean, having in your command center, four people team, you need those volunteers. I can't even begin to. I know actually a lot of people must be thinking, how do you filter it? You have so many, and I've read a stat, and it's a Canadian stat, so I'm sure it might even be higher in the States. I'd love to hear if you know. I read a Canadian stat that says that 1/3 of the people who were surveyed, that they expect that if there's an emergency, if there's some type of disaster or crisis, that when they post to social, they expect help. So if they post, I'm trapped in a car on Facebook, they expect for somebody to come and help them.
Right. And I mean, that we've seen similar. I think we did a study back in 2010 or 11, and it showed similar things. I mean, it's just
1/3 is huge. It's a super high expectation.
Yeah. And I think that maps to people's expectation in social anyway. Like on the Blue Sky side, you're seeing a lot of that with companies having to invest in a social customer service arm, particularly, this is a side note, but I needed to get to, I had a flight scheduled, long story short, I had a flight scheduled this weekend. I needed to go down. My sister-in-law was having a baby, and I wanted to be down there with my wife for the birth. And I ran into some roadblocks with the travel and needed it changed. Couldn't get through the traditional channels. And the social team walked me through it, changed my flight, was there for me. So I think that's people's expectation in a Blue Sky time is carrying over into the Gray Sky.
Absolutely.
Now, one of the things that we always want to remind people, even in this environment, we're going to do what we can to staff up and to be able to listen to that. We always want to remind folks, and I think for your government agencies on the line and others, our first thing is always to remind folks to contact, their 911. I don't think we ever want to get to a point where the expectation is for social to replace those frameworks, but I think it's placed a bigger onus on listening to the other frameworks. Like there's going to be times in the not so distant future, and I think we're seeing it in some states and some municipalities where they may not have a full out DigiDoc, but they're creating command center mentality to social. So they're saying, okay, here's what we need to track regionally to make sure that we're catching everybody. Because I think social plays a great role in that one-to-one micro assistance. And I think that's a great way, but it's hard to really scale. You don't have a triage system. You don't have, kind of that whole 911 experience. But social does allow you to see trends in the sense of, okay, if we start seeing tweets from a certain area, and I think the platforms are getting a little bit better in helping you kind of drill down a little bit even to the street level, social, as long as it's geotagged, and say, okay, if we're seeing a bunch of tweets come in from this area of town talking about a power outage or something. Does this map to what we're seeing? That's where social will continue to have its relevance. Where we're going to have the biggest challenge, to be quite frank with you, Melissa, is being able to scale our respective infrastructures up to the point where we can see every one of those mentions that are more urgent. We at Red Cross, one of the great things, my predecessor, Wendy Harmon, now heads a team called Information Management and Situation Awareness, which is in our disaster cycle services group. And part of the work that she's doing over there, which is amazing work, is she's looking at social, and her team is looking at social as another data point to be able to map to our relief operations or response operations. Whereas we are starting to morph more into the communications framework. Initially, we did it all, but I think the organization saw that it was too big for one team to try to do everything.
Makes sense.
Because there's a communications need that's very urgent and important too.
Absolutely.
But then there's also who can look at social from that sphere, and then who can look at social from, okay, is there enough data here to inform our emergency response vehicle drivers that maybe they need to go a mile south? So there has to be so that's extended our bandwidth to look at that, if you will.
Wow. And so when you talk about, I'm just thinking of all of the volunteers that you have, and they're around the country, and they're, ready to go on call depending on where they are at any time. So what are the key points? I think that a lot of organizations, whether we're talking government, private, public, a lot of organizations have trouble understanding and just comprehending what type of training their front line, never mind everybody else, but their front line needs to have in crisis communication for government entities and emergency management. So when you're talking about digital volunteers, so first of all, you're talking about people who want to help and who want to be a part of, these types of life-saving missions. But what are some key points when you're training them that you make sure that's, on the must-do list of make sure that they're trained in these areas?
One of the things we've been fortunate about, and I'll get deeper into the training, but we've been fortunate that a good number of our digital volunteers are also members of what we call our APAT team, which is our Advanced Public Affairs team.
Okay.
And this is a group of people, some who work for the Red Cross in a communications function. So they've had that experience and training, or they're very good at what they do. So they're able to actually deploy to disasters to assist with the media requests and assist with kind of getting the story out that way. So they've been trained, they've received advanced public affairs training, which also talks about crisis and dealing with the media and what to say and messaging and that piece. So a good number has been trained that way. Now, with that being said, every other volunteer that comes into the mix has 2 trainings as well. So there's a social basics online course that we have, which it's not just a disaster piece, but we encourage pretty much everybody in the Red Cross orbit, whether you be a volunteer, whether you be an employee, we encourage people to take that because it kind of shows them how we look at social, what is our strategy, philosophy, et cetera, some of the basic do's and don'ts about responding to different things. The other thing we have is a disaster volunteer training, which they can go through, which is a course that gets more into the whole idea of, okay, what is important for you to do? So there's some mental health components in there, we work closely with our mental health team to make sure that people know, don't do a digital volunteer shift over 4 hours because you need to decompress, you need to pull out of it a little bit.
Okay.
There's other training into what to respond to and what not to respond to, in terms of here's the categories you should respond to during a disaster, and here's the direction you should take. So that's how they get it in advance. Now, when we make the ask for digital volunteers to help us with a particular disaster, there is a little refresh involved. There's a refresh because we haven't had a ton of huge disasters in the last year and a half. So sometimes it's a refresh that's needed of kind of things to do. We also give them disaster specific processes to follow because a hurricane is different from an earthquake, is different from a flood.
Okay.
So what we'll do, we will actually assign people specific tasks and roles, and that's important. So I can go into that if you'd like me to a little bit too, kind of specific tasks that a person may have.
Sure.
So some people may have the task of being a monitor of like certain social channels, just not even using a tool, just going into Twitter and Facebook and monitoring our chapter or regional accounts. So what'll happen is a chapter or regional communicator who's on the ground dealing with the disaster can post information on their, we ask them to post locally first, post to your social channel, post to your local website. And what a digital volunteer may have the responsibility of doing is tracking that and making sure that somebody's there to answer the follow-up questions that will come from that post. So if a communicator can post, okay, we have 3 shelters open here, they're going to be open from this time frame at this school, that church, et cetera, inevitably somebody's going to see that on Facebook and leave a comment or a question and say, well, can I bring my kids? What do I need to bring? I don't have any ID. Can I get in? How long can I stay? Do I need insurance? Like any other question somebody may have. The communicator is carrying on a bigger function, so they may not have the time to sit and engage that way. So a digital volunteer can come in with, armed with information we give them, and they can respond to those comments and questions. Other digital volunteers may be assigned to kind of do environmental scan monitoring. So as you know from your experience, Melissa, with social media, particularly Facebook, when a disaster strikes, the people can mobilize pretty quickly on Facebook into like unofficial groups or pages or et cetera. Mm-hmm. And they don't always they have the best intentions, but don't always have the correct information.
Yes. And
so, but because social has this kind of trust by proximity theory that I believe that's more than trust of authority sometimes. If I know you, Melissa, and let's say you weren't even in the crisis space, and I know you and you started this page, and you've asked me to like it, and you live in my area, I'm like, I'm going to follow this because these are people I know. So these groups will build pretty quickly, but not always have the best information. So we would have a person monitor those groups and make sure that if information is not, if misinformation is being shared, we can offer the correct information, or give us a heads up if there's a lot of vitriol in that space towards the Red Cross. If they're like, I went to the Red Cross shelter and they turned me away. Like if there's a lot of that happening, keep us aware of that so we can get to the bottom of it. So that's another group. Other groups, like I said, will go into Radiant 6 and be responsible for kind of those, like you said, I'm scared, I'm nervous, etc. Going in and responding to those kind of from a urgent care kind of standpoint. So that's kind of the three categories.
Which is really great. So when you do the refresher courses, how quickly does that happen? So you have these 3 different categories of volunteers, and all of them probably have some degree of training. And like you said, luckily we haven't had that many disasters in the last year and a half or so. So the refresher, is that like a video you send them with a link, or is that an over the phone type of 5-minute briefing? What does that look like? Because at the same time, everything's happening in real time.
Yeah, that's a briefing that's kind of roped into the bigger briefing, like kind of the situation report.
Okay.
So we will put a message out to the volunteer group. We will get some people, and then we will set up a conference call or conference calls to say, here's what we need you to do. And then as part of that call, we'll say, and as a reminder, here's XYZ. As a reminder, here's what we want you to do. Here's what not to do. Just give them, and then we ask them if they have any questions.
Okay.
And we haven't had, like I said, since Sandy, we haven't had huge disasters. We've had big ones, like kind of major ones, but the average disaster we've had lately has been more manageable, where we've had maybe 2 or 3 digital volunteers, 3 or 4.
Okay.
Those are easy to kind of manage. If we were to have a large one, we just have to scale that response.
Which is the importance of scalability.
Yeah, so you can just reach out to more people. It's more management on our end. So it's just, managing the shifts on our end to say, okay, we're a little light between 4 and 8. And that's when the most of the conversation is taking place. So we might need to staff up a little bit. The other thing is, the other function of that DigiDoc here is that we do have people within the organization that work here at headquarters that can step up and step in.
Okay. Well, yes, I would expect. I mean,
So
yeah.
that DigiDoc becomes full of, it really becomes like a little social mission control, because the way it's set up, we not only have the visualization screens and some desktops, we have a bunch of like laptop docs, so you can just kind of pop in, jump on the net, and kind of get into it.
Okay. And how have you found, I mean, just looking at one degree of comments, so you have questions and you have comments that don't necessarily need to be responded to, but then you have comments that do need to be responded to, and you've got questions to answer, and you've got emergencies to spot, and, you know, people that you actually need to get some kind of emergency responder, you know, on the ground type thing. So how do you manage filtering through all of the noise to really zone in on who needs to be responded to and prioritize?
I think one of the things that I got to credit my colleague Wendy Harmon and her team over the last year or so, they've really helped us on the back end going into the Radiant 6 and really refining our listening framework.
Okay.
Because it's very easy, like if you have Tornado and Red Cross, you can pull in thousands of posts, but that's not relevant to what we need. So they've really gone in and really categorized different categories of conversation. So people who need help, they might say these keywords. People, damage might be assessed in these keywords. Preparedness, response. You know, they've been extremely helpful in really helping us manage that. I think our relationship with them is evolving in terms of what our roles will be in a major disaster, because I think by having more people looking at social, the better. We can all look at the same framework and be pulling different things, but I think the more people looking at it, the better. I think and also, like, we've been doing this long enough as the Red Cross to kind of know what the cycle of conversation will be, to be able to categorize what we need to do.
And at different stages of the crisis as well.
Right. So you could kind of, I mean, the teams who predate me have showed me kind of the bell curve that happens. You know, okay, at this particular point, depending if it's a disaster that's anticipated, like a hurricane or something along those lines, where you kind of know the threat levels are high, you know, you can kind of see, okay, in 48 hours out, you'll have people that are talking about like fear, they need emotional support. There's concern, there's preparedness messaging, and we need to get out in front of that with preparedness messaging. As people get into it, there may be some damage, or there may be if it's a disaster. Let's say it's a disaster that has kind of a small impact area but high visibility on the media. There will be a lot of people that want to help. Like when we dealt with the mudslides in Oso, Washington, not more than a year ago. Technically, that was a small region of the country, but because of the nature of the disaster and kind of the visibility, it was a high visibility thing. So you didn't necessarily have a lot of people asking for help from that area, like saying I'm stuck or this thing. But you did see a lot of people saying, I saw the reports on Good Morning America. How can I help? Do you guys need money? Can I send clothes? Can I go volunteer? Can I go help the relief efforts? So you start seeing kind of how these every disaster takes on a different personality in terms of the social conversation, and kind of how that bell curve works. And then there's other reputation management things that we need to look at from our standpoint as communications, while other teams are looking at the social from a response and relief, kind of how we handle the operation. There's a reputation management scenario that we need to be tracking as well to make sure that there's not false information, going out. Like there was an example from Oso last year where on Facebook, somebody posted that a Costco truck pulled up with supplies and the Red Cross turned them away. Well, that wasn't the complete story. Okay. The complete story was, and so we saw that on Facebook, and our communicator got wind of it, who was on the ground, and he was able to talk to the media and give them the complete story, which was more so we didn't turn it away, but we weren't taking in-kind contributions at that time. So we sent them to a sister partner organization who had the infrastructure to take in those supplies. And we actually had pictures of the pallets being unloaded. So there's a reputation management side that comes into play as well in this as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so when it comes to, I'm sure that, so there's keywords that you're monitoring and there's hashtags, of course. So there would be, I suppose, regular hashtags. So if it's a tornado, it's going to be hashtag tornado. If it's an earthquake, the hashtag earthquake or some form of that is going to be a part of the messaging. But then there's every crisis also has its own hashtag that develops. So I guess I have a two-part question. First, so developing hashtag strategies for crisis and emergency management is something that I help organizations with. And one of the questions that I get asked most often is, when do you create your own hashtag and when do you take on what other people are already creating? And I have answers that I respond to that. But I would love to hear how you guys approach that.
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think one of the things about our listening tool is that when you put the general terms in, there's also a way you can drill down into the insights and see within that conversation what hashtags are being used most often. Mm-hmm. So that's one. You can do a kind of an automated standpoint. The other thing, that's where our folks on the ground come into play, our communicators on the ground. Because what typically drives a hashtag locally is how the media categorizes the disaster. Because the media is the one like tweeting and putting things out, or like if
they want their headlines, absolutely.
Juno hit, so now we're doing Juno, Weather Channel, so I think that's where some of the intelligence from the ground comes into play. Okay. Because when the local media starts pushing it out, then they go up to the affiliates, then we start this taxonomy that exists where you have to layer it on. So you'll layer it on. And the good thing about this is your listening should evolve as the disaster evolves. So you got to be nimble with it. So because the conversation could be shifted by one word, depending on the speaker. So if another, like if CNN, like if the local media calls it one thing, right, and then CNN swoops in and calls it something else, you got to have both in there.
Yes.
Because CNN may dictate the national conversation, but the local conversation is still being generated. So I think you can, like I said, just to wrap up, you can use your tools to look at the general conversation around a tornado and then kind of see what are the main hashtags that are being a part of that conversation. You can use your word clouds as well to kind of figure out what people are talking about. And then the other side, again, is just be listening and talking to those with intelligence around the information. So the people on the ground, our communicators on the ground that are talking to the local media, that are seeing media reports, and then listening on your own to those key influencers of the conversation and kind of what terms are they using, because that'll kind of dictate, because a lot of people are just retweeting and not really adding to the conversation. Mm-hmm. So that will add to it as well.
So do you have these conversations with, or do you coordinate with other third parties that you work closely with in terms of disaster response and emergency management? For example, one thing that we saw with the Boston Marathon bombings was that all of the government agencies involved with the investigation, none of them were using a consistent hashtag. So it was complicated, or it was just more, it took more effort to monitor everything that you wanted to monitor because there wasn't one unanimous hashtag being used by all of the government agencies, for example. So when you realize that, okay, we're going to use these hashtags at this point in the crisis, I realize that changes. But do you coordinate with other entities that are also being listened to? Like, is this part of something you guys do, or do you just kind of go after response? So you're communicating in an emergency, you're using what the public uses and just really focusing on your communications externally.
I think my team, the information that we see feeds into it feeds up the chain to others at higher levels of the organization that are working on the disaster, that are in most cases interfacing with our partners.
Okay.
And so I can't tell you like exactly how that works in that sense, but I know that the insights that we give are shared and those questions are asked. And I think social's taken a bigger part in that, but we share those insights, and those are at least a piece of information that those who are kind of at the higher levels of leadership can share in those kind of multi-agency conversations.
Okay.
A lot of it has to do with less about the hashtag sometimes, as well as like the conversation. So we may say like, we're seeing a lot of damage in what we're tracking. Are y'all seeing that too? Especially now that, this is becoming more common among government agencies. Our partners are using social in some form or fashion and expanding their use of it, FEMA particularly. So I think with that communication, and I also think we follow each other, like in our listening, we have a topic profile that is partners. So we can kind of get a feel for what our partners are saying in the conversation as well, kind of separate from the noise of the regular conversation.
Okay.
Whether it's Salvation Army, which partners with us a lot of times, whether it's some of the other entities that are non-government organizations that partner with us, or it could be FEMA or Homeland Security or whomever, or local emergency service personnel. We can kind of track those, and I think that there's also kind of a, you kind of put in your mind like who are you going to listen to as well, and you kind of share that with the teams. Say, okay, in this type of disaster, in addition to everything, we want to also make sure that we're listening to our partners on social. We're listening to FEMA, we're listening to the other partners, and they're doing the same thing too. I mean, we're at the end of the day, we're all trying to help each other. So they're listening to us. They're looking when we tweet stuff. A lot of times we'll get retweets from even the head of FEMA.
One of the words that you keep repeating, and I think it's so important for listeners to realize this, no matter what type of organization or industry you're in, is listening. We're talking about crisis communications. Listening, actively, engagingly listening, is one of the secrets to successful crisis communications.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I think listening is at the core of any social media strategy.
Any communication strategy, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, communication strategy. I think you made your point is well taken. Larger communication strategy, because you got to listen to really. That's where you get the insight into what you need to communicate and how you need to communicate it and where you need to communicate it and when you need to communicate it. You really get that insight from listening. And like I said, we can't necessarily always personally tag every conversation or every post that comes in, but with that listening mechanism that we have in place, again, seeing those trends is really key. And I think that the tools are starting to mature, whether it's Radiant or anywhere else. The tools are starting to mature where you can now use certain tools, whether it's Radiant, Sprinkler, or whatever else is out there, or tools that are more crisis oriented, to get to a point where eventually we'll be able to draw a circle around a geographic area and really drill down that way.
Yes.
I think that will help out a lot of the local municipalities and the local cities to be able to drill down, even from not even big disaster standpoints, but disasters that are big in their community, a home fire, a mass casualty event, to track a criminal. The uses of this, but again, you're right. It starts and stops with listening. I want to listen more than I put out information, because if I'm not in tune with the community, then I'm not going to put out information. Like, I'll put out a fundraising message too soon and alienate the community. I'll look like I'm not in tune, or I won't reach the people who are trying to help, or I won't reach the people who need help. So
absolutely, it's bringing me back to about a year ago, I was at an event and I was speaking with a colleague of mine who's actually in the International Committee of the Red Cross, part of that organization. And I remember we're sitting around and we're just all talking. We're talking about world disasters and world crises and just this fascinating discussion. And a bunch of us kind of realized that Milash, the man from the ICRC, he was just kind of sitting back and just listening. And normally this guy's got so much to say and he's so smart, he's so interesting to listen to. But we said, "Hey, Milash, what's up? What, you're not talking." And he goes, "Well, when I talk, I don't learn anything."
Right.
And I thought that stayed with me. And then I'm realizing it's coming back to me as we're having this discussion. Relevant information for crisis communication. So in terms of, I know that this question is probably on people's minds. How do you guys keep up with all of the trends and the tools and the platforms and the preferences and all of these? Social is so ever evolving. So how do you guys keep atop of all of that, all of these changes?
I think I always, I'm very proud of the team that I have, because they keep me in tune to a lot of this stuff. Like, for example, before I got on the phone with you, we were figuring out how we're going to talk with some of our, to get some more guidance on any challenges with potentially using Periscope and Meerkat. That's a conversation we just had about 3 minutes ago. Just, okay, we see that this could have potential for people to live stream during disasters, but what are some of the release implications and things like that? So we're already having those conversations. Now, that's in that particular segment. But I think one of the things is we always understand that the community is in certain places, and we kind of look at that. So during disasters, again, the majority of mentions still are on Twitter and Facebook. Mm-hmm. And so we got to make sure that we are aligned with that. I think that the clearer you are about your strategy, you don't get caught up in the new tools. Now, you can look at categories. Like when I said Meerkat and Periscope, I'm not necessarily looking at them as separate entities in that sense. I'm more so looking at, okay, this is an emerging category of social opportunity where people are now going to share live video, which we have to track. So, I think you keep up with that. I think that you keep an eye out for what can help you. And the great thing about the Red Cross and the technology community is if you see something that comes out and you reach out to the person behind that, they love talking with us. I mean, I love it.
Of course, you're also passionate about. It's like ask me to talk about crisis. Jeez, I'll never
right.
stop.
Oh, hey, we need your help or your thoughts. I mean, this is not a disaster note, but we just announced a partnership yesterday with the new platform Yik Yak.
Yes.
Where they're going to help us drive more blood donations on college campuses in the month of April.
Wonderful.
Using their tools. So, I mean, you just keep an eye on what's there. But again, we want to make sure it's very important to me that we maximize the leverage because there are aspects of Twitter and Facebook that I think we're still building on. Like we just launched a website, well, kind of a microsite within the Red Cross website called the Disaster Action Room. And what that is that's going to be a place eventually where when a disaster strikes, it'll be the place on our website where you can see a curated social stream of people with approved accounts that we know are giving verified information, little nuggets as to updates on where you can find out about shelters as well as how you can help. And that's building on a lot of APIs from Twitter, Facebook, Flickr, YouTube, Instagram. We built that on the back of a lot of APIs so that so it can make us more efficient. So when a chapter person posts to their local Facebook, they don't have to send it to us again, or we don't have to search it out. If they tag it correctly, it'll automatically feed into this national page. So that's kind of the next generation for us, and more so than individual platforms. We're trying to leverage like the APIs and the data that's out there to better inform. And we look at the data collectively. We're agnostic to where it comes in from. Now our disaster team itself has a really good relationship with the technology community because they're looking at, more technological applications that can help us in the future, whether that's drones, whether that's, that group is very tied into technology as well.
Makes sense. Wow. So this portal that you're talking about, that's going to be internal or external?
It's going to be external.
Excellent.
You can actually see it now. Very excited. We had to update the APIs, of course, most recently, but you go to redcross.org/disaster-action, and you can kind of get a flavor for it.
Disaster. I'm going to put that as a link, -action. So that'll be a link below this podcast, no matter where you guys are listening to it from. So if you want to go check that out, and I know I do, definitely. Actually, which actually kind of brings me to a question that I was wondering. I know I'm kind of, yeah. So what kind of partnerships do you have with all of these platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and that type of, I realize that they must be you must have some really great partnerships just to make sure that they, if it's anything from keeping you off of blacklists by accident or, just making things accessible to you. And I know how willing they are to help humanitarian organizations and government entities, especially these two categories. So how helpful have they been to you guys in all of this setup? Sorry, go ahead.
Before I got here, they were helpful. And during my time here, they've been extremely helpful in terms of really trying to, because I think it's on two levels. I think that the people behind these organizations understand that their technology has become so widely used that they'd be doing a disservice to their users to not try to figure out how the technology they built can contribute to the greater good in this respect.
Absolutely.
So we've seen that a lot. I think they've been helpful on a tactical level as we've kind of launched different things. And for example, like, getting us access to Twitter alerts, which allows us to send an alert to a person's phone. Mm-hmm. All the way to helping us with our promoted Twitter strategy during disasters and kind of helping us navigate that. Facebook has been super helpful. Last year, you may have seen They used a feature they hadn't used before called their megaphone, where they put like a banner across Facebook. I think it was I want to say it was related to the Philippines, or Typhoon Haiyan, I think it was. But where everybody who logged into Facebook for a period of time got a message to donate. So, I mean, they've beta tested us with many things. So, and there's startups that have been helpful too. This technology community as a whole, I think, is very attuned to the fact that their users are using it this way. I know Facebook just launched a kind of disaster related kind of safe feature.
Mm-hmm.
And so they all been helpful. I mean, they all been very helpful.
I think they feel it's a part of their social responsibility, which it is, in fact.
I think so too. And I think, and they see more data than we do in terms of like during a disaster when people see it. And I think the future of that, we just would love to continue those. We want to get to that point where we're being able to respond and such. But they've all been extremely helpful and extremely open. And any questions we have about the tool, they've put us with people that can help. So they've been really great partners in everything we've done socially in this space.
It's wonderful collaborations, when you're working for such important causes and missions, and just the community of help and volunteer and just accessibility is heartwarming. It's wonderful.
Yep.
So Curtis, I guess the last question that I'd have for you is the biggest lessons you've learned along your way.
In my relatively short time here, I think the biggest lessons I've learned is just the importance of listening to the community, because I think in listening that's helped us kind of refine our process. I think having a good team is important. You have to be wired a certain way in this space. I mean, you know this as well. And I think I have a team that's wired to this space, and we have colleagues within the organization that are very helpful. But I also think that we're just at the cusp of kind of the evolution of social as a data source during disaster. I think we're just at the cusp of it. I think that whether it's apps, whether it's platforms, I think we're still at the cusp. And I think as agencies, all government agencies, or anybody who deals with crisis response, disaster response, that kind of thing, humanitarian services, needs to have some sort of baseline listening structure in place to build from. You got to do it. It's not a matter of, it may be in this budget this year, it may not. It's mandatory that you have something. Now, how big that team is, that's relative to your individual scenario and kind of the scope of what you're trying to do. But at the very least, you need to have this as part of your communications and engagement strategy and response strategy going forward. And at least if anybody listening, if you haven't done this and it's 2015, start with it. Talk to people like Melissa who can help you get started. Reach out to us who can help you get started. But I think getting started is the key. You don't have to be us or FEMA in one day, but getting your feet in there and getting a tool and getting something you feel comfortable with, and just getting people into the muscle memory of looking to social as a source of informative data. That's the one thing that I've learned and want to pass along to everybody listening to your podcast.
Well, thank you so much for saying that, because it's something that I just repeat and repeat and repeat and say in different ways. And it's so great to have somebody like you who's doing these wonderful things, this important work, and doing it so well and so evolutionary. You guys are visionaries. Red Cross are visionaries in what you guys are doing and what you implement and how you strategize and experiment and all of these things. So thank you for saying that important message. And I hope that listeners listen. It really is about a mindset. You're right that you don't have to be you don't even have to aim to be the Red Cross by next year. But it's about adapting this type of mindset, this proactive mindset, this listening mindset, this mindset that empowers your team to seek out opportunities as well as identify red flags as they emerge and respond to them in real time. This is a mindset that needs to be incorporated or adapted into the culture of the organization. And it doesn't matter if you're a government agency or a humanitarian or the public sector. You can be any organization. You can be the little mom and pop shop to the Fortune 500 companies. This is key for successful crisis management today.
You're absolutely correct.
Well, Curtis, thank you so much for taking the time. Where can people go? So we have redcross.org forward slash disaster hyphen action. Where else can people go to learn about what you guys are doing and follow you and just point us to the links?
Go to redcrosschat.org, redcrosschat.org, which is our blog. Follow us on all the platforms, Twitter especially, at Red Cross. Facebook is just Facebook. Just look up American Red Cross on Facebook. Those are our main. I think I'll send you all our social links as well, Melissa.
Sounds good. And go ahead.
That's where you can kind of see what's going on, and definitely follow the disaster action page, which is ever evolving. Just I want to put that out there. It's ever evolving. We had it built from scratch, and we are learning. It's a tool for the future, and we're going through our paces on it.
That's wonderful. That's exciting. That disaster action platform. That's really, really cool. Really cool. Well, Curtis, thank you so much for taking this time to have this enlightening and just informative conversation with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it too.
Okay. Thank you for tuning in and listening to this week's episode of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast with me, Melissa Agnes. I release a new episode every Sunday, so if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe to this Crisis Intelligence Podcast on iTunes or Stitcher so you don't miss out on any future episodes. While you're at it, feel free to leave me a rating or review on iTunes. This will go such a long way in helping me get this important information to more people just like you to help benefit their crisis management and crisis communications. Additionally, if you'd like to have me come and speak at an upcoming event that you may be organizing, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. You can email me at melissa@melissaagnes.com. Thanks so much for tuning in this week, and I look forward to talking even more crisis intelligence with you next Sunday.